everybody, good afternoon. I hope all of you guys are doing well. Now, before we begin with the much awaited marathon, I'd like to very quickly do a mic check and a visual check. So, I'd be very grateful if you could please write in the chat box as to my audibility and my visibility. So, I'll wait for a heads up, and once that is a good go, we will begin with no further ado. And I am very sorry for all of the delay that happened. The internet really conked off and we couldn't get a good streaming strength. And that was the reason why there has been a delay. But nonetheless, all of it is going to be compensated. And whatever remains will, of course, be eventually, taken up in the follow-up YTs that we have. But with what we have, let us waste no further time, no reason to cry over spilt milk. Let us begin with what we have. But of course, I would like to, get a mic check, please. So if I am audible, now Tanishka, I am so sorry the class got late because we were not having a good streaming strength, like we said. The internet was not okay. With the rains, come all of these goof ups of the internet that do happen. And we did not want to start with a very shaky or a very turbulent internet. Otherwise, we would have had a very bad 2 hours to ourselves. So we apologize greatly for the delay. And like I said, I will try and cover up as much as we can and make the most of whatever time remains. But I will come back with whatever remains in my question set so that those can also be taken care of. But of course, okay, not an issue. Thank you so much. Seriously, I mean, it's very kind of you. It's very large-hearted of you to be able to excuse, something that big because clearly you'd been waiting for about 45 minutes, and that's not the kind of delay we'd ever want unless there is a really, huge technical snag that we are not able to cater to. That's generally when it happens. Okay, I am audible. Okay, and with that, let us begin with what we have now. I want to give you a brief of what I've come up with today and what yardstick will we be able to set for ourselves when we finish with the exercise that we do today. Now, we all know that Parajumbles are quite a popular set of questions asked when it comes to the management examination. With Parajumbles, there are categorically two types or two variants that are asked. So we have one which is called the theta version. The other, of course, is the non-theta. Now, theta is a short form for type in the answer, TITA. CAT specifically tends to be asking for the theta-based Parajumbles. While there are, of course, all of the other management examinations that do go heavy on the Parajumbles, but then they give it with the ones that have options to themselves. The options are always an easy go, reason being why, because it helps us take lead of what needs to come next. And it's easier for us to sequentially put the sentences because even if you are a tad bit confused of what it is, the options, the permutations, and there's so much more logic and strategy that goes alongside it, which can help you decide which is the answer and which is not. Jumping on to the theta versions, now here is where the trick begins. Because you don't have the options, you don't have anything to lead yourself with, which means there has to be absolute clarity and confidence of the mandatory pairs that you make. And in lieu of the mandatory pairs, the sequence that we make so that ultimately what comes out becomes a coherent paragraph for us. So the sequence is a long shot if the mandatory pairs are not taken care of. Now, besides the mandatory pairs, if you don't wish to apply them, well, the application of it makes it a point that, we have sure-shot pairing, that is two sentences that are in no manner not going to go with each other. That is the kind of confidence that we have. But if in case it so happens that you have the sentences and that you don't wish to apply the mandatory pairs, there is something which is called the rule of narration that you can apply. So quickly, I'm just going to walk you through what the two etiquettes or the two rules of narration are. We will then begin with the questions that we have. And we're then going to go back to, of course, whatever be your, whatever be the questions that you all go about solving. And as and when we keep solving, we will keep talking about the mandatory pairs and the rules that are coming in connection to it. So now the rule of narration simply says that whatever be the kind of communication, so ideally there are two types of communication. एक होता है हमारा verbal mode, दूसरा होता है हमारा written mode. अब हमेशा guys याद रखना Verbal mode is far more assistive. It is more understandable. Why? Because it has something which we call the voice. The voice helps in giving the idea with more clarity, and it helps the other person who is the receiver of this information understand it exactly the way it is meant to be. Cut to reading. When it comes to a written mode of communication, the intention of why the communication was done in the first place remains the same. But it's a little more handicapped. It's a little more paralyzed format of communication. Why? Because we do not have the tone, the voice to it. And since there is no voice that assists the text, it is upon the discretion of the receiver of the information to know how exactly should one be receiving this information. And here is where multiple interpretations come in. So to be able to sort out and to be able to make sure that there is symmetry, there's proper nexus of information that is being made and that it makes sense to the receiver, there are two thumb rules that we have. Starting with the first. Communication must always be intertwined with one another. When I say intertwined, I simply mean to say that information cannot be randomly placed next to each other. Now, we've all written answers when we were small, and whenever we'd write a statement, we'd make sure that we speak a sentence, and whatever be the following sentence, it has to take its hint from the previous idea. That's how we make a blockchain of information, and that is how we are able to assist the other person with what are we likely to say, because there's foreshadowing, there's anticipation, there is so much more that gears up the text, and we understand flavorfully what exactly is it that the passage seems to be about. So always make sure that in Parajumbles again, whatever is the kind of statements that you assist or you put next to each other, they must have a tad bit of hint of how the inception of this idea happened from the previous idea. So माहौल बनाना जरूरी होता है. रैंडम पॉपअप नहीं हो सकता. ए के बाद बी आएगा, बी के बाद सी आएगा, ए के बाद जी नहीं आ सकता, ए के बाद एच नहीं आ सकता, ए के बाद एस नहीं आ सकता. It has to go in a symmetry. Second, information must always be forward looking, and once you speak about whatever you have spoken, you must not go on and on in a jumbled manner, repeating about the same info. To simplify this, what I mean to say is, communication बोलता है कि जब एक बार एक मुद्दे पे बात करना चालू कर दो, तो जितनी बातें उस पे करनी है करके खत्म करो. ये jumping of information from one to the other बिल्कुल भी allowed नहीं है. It is not what you should do. So if I am to speak about Ram, then I must speak everything that I want to speak about Ram, get done and dusted with, and then move to Sham. I can't go Ram, Sham, Ram, Sham. It creates irritation in the mind of the reader because the reader will constantly be fluctuating between information. And information in this regard has to be forward looking. So once you step onto an idea, once you've elaborated on what it is, you have to connect the next dot and go forward. You can't go on and on lingering onto the same thing, because that is a repetition, that is not narration. So please make sure that once you start to talk about an idea, you've sort of spoken about it, and that everything needs to be a nexus. They all have to have a hint of what needs to be supplied with a previous vibe of the idea altogether. Which is why when we try to put these two rules into Parajumbles, whenever we read the statements, you must have seen most of the faculties, including I, and of course you guys also, you all must be picking out your catchwords and then assembling all of the statements together which have the same catchword. Abhi series usme kya hai mujhe nahi pata, but I definitely know for a fact that the words have to come one after the other. Then we're going to read the sentence through and see which information is leading to the next, because all of the information has to handhold one another. It's like an information chain that we are going to be making here. So if you don't wish to apply the mandatory pairs, this is one way in which you can get some direction as to how your flow of information needs to be. But of course, like I said, the usage of the mandatory pair makes our pairing more authentic. It's more concrete. There is no room, there's no wiggle room for any sort of dilemma, and that you will know what should be the statement coming together. And I think with that, let us begin. Now, like I said initially, this exercise that we are going to be doing today can be a very good test of your expertise in Parajumbles. It can be the very yardstick for you to gauge how your preparation is. Why I say this is because all of the parajumbles that we're going to be doing today have been exclusively taken from 2021 and 2022, all of the three slots of the cat paper. So the way you perform will actually be a very good indicator for you to know how well can you perform on the real-time cat passages. And this is why this YT becomes a lot more important, and it tends to have a lot more gravity than any random exercise on Parajumbles altogether. And I think now that I've set the tone for what is it that we have for today, let us begin. Now we're going to go on the same roulette like always. So I will of course share the screen. I will step aside. I will wait for you to punch in your answers. Once I have an answer from the majority, we will begin with the discussion. Parajumbles I know can be a little frustrating, so and it can be too monotonous, which is why I will be logging off. I shall be signing off at about 4:15. So let's try and see, and let's try and attempt to do as many as we can. There will come a time wherein your minds are going to be very saturated. Happens every time with Parajumbles, and which is why I don't wish to push you. I don't want to impose you to keep doing it, because then we will simply be punching into the answers without much thought and without much clarity. I will come back with the remaining set of it, maybe in the following week, and we will try to level up again by seeing how well can we perform. And with that, let us begin, everybody. On to the first one. So I'm simply going to set aside, and I'd like you to read and get back to me. Now, whatever be the doubts that you have with respect to Parajumbles, now is a good time to keep punching in. And if just not Parajumbles, anything around cat. If there's anything that bothers you, if there's anything that you really want to know, because we're pretty close to the examination now. So anything that would just be, you know, an epiphany for you, or anything that can help, and in some way that I can guide or mentor you, I shall be very privileged and very glad. Make best use of this time that you have. On to the very first question, everybody. Please start. Commutes, which I means to travel. So over here, the moment I understand that when their commutes grew longer, that is from one place to the other, the travel time. That is what it means. Okay, so I do have answers coming in, but I'm going to wait for more. Okay. All right, then let's see. Now, whenever you approach a parajumble, always remember you must read all of the statements. You can't begin by reading the first one and deciding where exactly should you place it. You could possibly do it if you have the options, but since you don't have the options, this is not going to be something that will be very helpful for you. So let's begin with this and see which of the following is going to be the right series. Now, upon reading, if we find any of the two sentences that seem to be talking together, which are likely to be, put together, we will, of course, we will freeze them together. Sequence as to what should be, which one should come first and then which one has to come later is going to be something that we will decide eventually. But sometimes just making your pair is of course enough, because you would know how to go ahead with that. Now let's go. Some company leaders are basing their decision, sorry, are basing their decisions on locating offices to foster innovation and growth, as their best performing inventors suffered the greatest productivity loss when their commutes grew longer. So some companies are basing their decisions on locating offices to foster innovation. So they're locating, they're figuring out what needs to be done, because of course even the greatest of the best performing ones had to, or they happen to suffer a lot because of the long commutes. Okay. Shorter commutes support innovation by giving employees more time in the office and greater opportunities for in-person collaboration while removing the physical restraint of a long commute. Now, over here, if you see, both seem to be talking about the commute and, of course, the consequence of the commute. So, yes, there is some similarity between them, but we have not been able to get statements which are going to be, very close, uptight with each other. Let's hear them. This is not always the case. Now, when I say this, now this is a pronoun, which means there will have to be a noun which is going to talk about it. So I know I cannot begin with a three. Three is not the statement I will begin. It's not going to be an opener for me. So this is not always the case. Remote work does not automatically lead to greater creativity and productivity, as office water cooler conversations are also very important for innovation, to which they go about by saying it's just not the distance. A lot of times it's the normal chit chat that we do in the office. पानी के वाटर कूलर के पास जाके जो 2-3 मिनट की बात होती है उससे भी, because euphoria, that tube light moment can happen anytime. Some see the link between long commutes and productivity as support for work from home scenario, as many workers have grown accustomed to their commute free arrangements during the pandemic. Now this is clearly telling me as to why we need to push the place closer, simply because the pandemic has sort of cushioned people to stay back at home and to know how exactly the how to be working from home, thereby increasing productivity and making sure that all things are pretty okay productivity wise, efficiency wise. So now that I have all of the statements to myself, let us begin. Of the lot, I know that some see the link, some company leaders, now that's not what the opener is. The all of the passage tends to be talking about commute. There is only one statement that talks about how or what the commute or what exactly is the problem. So the one statement that is identified my problem statement over here is going to be option 2, which means I'm going to be beginning with a 2. Now, the moment I say that, in-person collaboration while removing the physical restraint, now we knew that once you've talked about the journey, how long the commute is, we will continue on the same line, thereby including another topic. So we knew that the commute growing longer was also mentioned in the first statement, which means 2 and 1 become a mandatory pair. In extension to the idea that some company leaders are basing their decision locating offices to foster the innovation and growth as their best performing because productivity is lost. Now, the moment you talk about the fact that the productivity has been lost, you then simply say, okay, we have the options coming in. You then, of course, want to talk about what is the kind of link that they have, because we will continue on the same lines, which means only when we finish talking about long commutes will we have another statement, which goes to say that my next statement has to be 4, because it still continues about and it's trying to be talking about the link, right? Productivity of some work, they have grown accustomed to their commute free arrangements during the pandemic, and then ultimately this is not always the case. Remote work is घर से काम करना. इसका आइडिया कहाँ इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ था? The fact that आप work from home कर रहे हो, you've gotten accustomed due to the pandemic. जब आपने work from home की बात की तभी तो अगला लाइन आप उस पे लाओगे, which is going to be around remote work. Otherwise ऑफिस वाली बात अभी तक हो रही थी तो एकदम से हम remote work कैसे ला सकते हैं? One idea has to lead, right? It's like a movie. You have to make an imagery of the information. So obviously यहाँ से work from home से मेरा ये वाला idea आ गया remote work का, which means the last statement will have to be 3. And when read together, this makes a coherent paragraph. The correct sequence is going to be 2, 1, 4 and 3. So you all had 1, 4, 3 and 2. तो 4 and 3 का mandatory pair तो आपने बहुत बढ़िया बना दिया, right? But 4 and 3 are not going to be the openers. They are in fact going to be towards the closing end of it. Does everybody understand this one and why we have that as a series? Let's try the next, guys. Your hands on to the next one, please. Okay, all right then. Let's see. Again, we'll read all of it. Now, the first statement says the creative element in product design has become of paramount importance as it is one of the few ways a firm or industry can sustain a competitive advantage over its rivals, right? In fact, the creative element in the value of the world industry would be larger still if we added the contribution of the creative element in other industries such as the design of tech accessories, all right? The creative industry is receiving a lot of attention as its growth rate is faster than that of the world economy as a whole. Okay, seems like an opener because it's really telling us it's gotten a lot of attention and it's growing, which means the next line by default can be about the growth of it. Okay, now it is for this reason that today's trade issues are increasingly involving intellectual property as the Western countries have an interest in protecting their revenue along with the freeing trade in non-tangibles. Now, of course, the fourth statement tends to be talking about why there are trade issues and why they seem to be increasing altogether, which means we will see that whichever is going to get into the idea of how, these intangible assets, that is the trade value, can actually be taken into, looks like that is something that has been talked about in the first statement. So let me just see what the answers are. So that's 3, 1, 2, 4 and 1, 3, 2, 4. Now by default, I know that I will be beginning with a 3. राइट बिकॉज ओवर हियर वो कैसी बात कर रहा है, वो बोल रहा है कि क्रिएटिव इंडस्ट्री बहुत सारा अटेंशन एकदम से उसको मिल रहा है in today's times and the growth rate is also a lot faster. Now that we've talked about what it is, let's talk about what is so popular or what is the one thing that really makes up for the creative industry. So obviously वो क्या होगा, creative element होगा ना उसका, ऐसा क्या है उसमें. So the creative element in product design has become of paramount importance. This is one of the most important and in one of the few ways a firm industry can sustain competitive advantage, which means the next statement over here. Okay, but we have another statement. This is likely to come, but we have another which says about the creative element. अब इसको देखते हैं. In fact, the creative element in the value of the world industry would be still larger if we added the contribution of the creative element in other industries such as design of tech. Okay, now I know for a fact that between the two, the one statement that I now should be putting, because both have creative element, has to be 2 guys and not 1. Why? Because जब मैंने यहाँ पे बोल दिया onto the world economy, then the next is simply talking about the world industries, and from the world industries हम लोग specifically किस में आए, such as the design of tech industry. अब इसमें जानते हैं इतना specific क्या है. So of course इसमें creative element की बात आएगी. So I know that in creative element in product design has become of paramount importance as it is one of the few ways. तो इसमें भी creative क्यों इतना important है, ये दोनों तो obviously they had to come together. बस हमें sequence ढूंढना था कि दोनों में क्या होगा, and ultimately now it has become of paramount importance. Now let's see. It is for this reason that today's it is because इनको competitive advantage मिलता है, and जब competitive advantage होता है, it is for this reason, this being the advantage that they get, that today's trade issues are increasingly involving intellectual property. So that this makes a noun pronoun rule here. So 1 and 4 have to go together because इसमें एक pronoun है, and that goes back to the original statement with, of course, the first statement being talked about the advantages of it. So our sequence over here is going to be 3, 2, 1 and 4. So we did have a 3 which was a beginner. Very good job. So Priya and Tanishka both began with a 3. Good job. You put baby steps into it, right? Doesn't mean कि पूरा sequence एक बार में सही होना. Eventually of course आएगा. उसके बाद आपका 2 और 4 obviously 1, 2, 4 का बस उल्टा हो गया. It's because you started with this. But over here, if you see why we have the first coming after second is because it says the creative element in product design specifically. Product design के बारे में हम कैसे बात सकते हैं, such as design of tech accessories. अभी design of tech accessories थोड़ा सा generic है, and the rule of mandatory pair always says we go from general to specific. That is how the rules go. So जब आपने tech of accessories में बात किया, उसके बाद इनके creative element पे बात किया. So it's not going to be 1 and 2, it's going to be 2 and 1. I think जैसे आपका 2 and 1 आता, आपका sequence अपने आप बैठ जाता. Because you are ending with a 4, बस 1 और 2 का अंतर हुआ. I so wish, कभी ऐसा नहीं लगता कि Parajumbles में step marking होनी चाहिए. जैसे स्कूल में करते थे, there were steps of construction. At least इतनी मेहनत करे तो कुछ तो नंबर आए. Otherwise आते ही नहीं है उसमें. And it's just 1 or 2 statement, which takes away all of the marks. And 3 नंबर की बात है भाई. It's not even something, that you can let go of. So I strongly believe that, Parajumbles should have step markings, just like in maths and, when we used to do all of these other numericals back then. Okay, all right. I hope this one's clear. Let's get to the next one, everybody. This one clearly is a very easy one. Read it through, guys. Make confident pairs. You'll get through it. I'm so sorry. I'm just passing to the other side. Okay, let's go. Let's read all of it. Now, fish skin collagen has excellent thermostability and tensile strength, making it deal making it ideal for use of bandage that adheres to the skin and adjusts to body movements. Okay, all right. So we understand how the fish skin collagen can actually help in making bandages. Now, collagen is one of the main structural protein and connective tissues in the human body, which is well known for promoting skin regeneration. Okay, definitely second looks like an opener because it gives a very welcoming idea to collagen, which all of the other statements tend to be talking about. So in your minds, for now, we can reserve 2 being the opener. But of course, we'll be reading all of it to be sure of. Now, fish skin swims in here as diseases and bacteria that affect fish are different from most human pathogens, which means there is some sort of causal relationship. That is, it says that it swims in here. Where here? So we need to know. So we don't know where exactly should this be coming in. Let's see the next. The risk of introducing disease agents into another species through the use of pig and cow collagen proteins for wound healing has inhibited its broader application in its medical field. Okay. Now that we have read and we've talked about, the kind of apprehensions one has, the kind of risk that is involved, the fact that, how this tends to have excellent thermostability and which is why it is used as bandage that adheres to the skin and adjusts to the body movements. So we understand how it helps when being used in the body and how it bandages the entire body also. That is some sort of repair is what it tends to be doing. So we know for a fact that of the lot, our opener will have to be statement 2, which is hands down correct. So everybody did have a 2. Now, once we read about the fact that it is the main structural protein, right, which is also a protein in connective tissues in the human body that is well known for promoting the skin regeneration. Now, soon after 2, we are then going to be having 4, because this says the risk of introducing disease agents into another species through the use of pig and collagen protein for wound healing has inhibited its broader application in the medical field. That means it's just not about, having making it edible. It also has a broader implication. So now these that we talk about, of course, are going to be the broader implications कि किस किस और तरीके से use हो सकते हैं. तो भाई एक intro तो देना पड़ेगा ना उस broader implication के लिए. So which means अगर हम यहाँ पे 4 लगा देंगे, so this goes to be talking about how we can now use it more effectively elsewhere. What is that going to be? Fish skin swim in here as disease. So we did talk about disease. Now we know that both of these must be a mandatory pair because obviously ये लोग एक जैसे बात कर रहे हैं. So fish can swim in here. So in here is going to be, of course, the prototype of the body that is there. And the bacteria that affect the fish are different from most of the human pathogens. And ultimately, coming on to fish skin collagen has excellent thermostability and tensile strength, making it ideal for the use of bandage. So these tend to be talking about how there is a broader application in the medical field. One of it being this and one of it being this. The correct sequence is going to be 2, 4, 3, and 1. Let's see who got that. So Priya got that one right. Excellent. And the other ones, of course, you have the correct beginner to yourself, which is going to be 2. You then have 1, 3, and 4. So again, a slight swap of the series could have really done wonders for us. No worries with that. Let's try the next one, guys. Do we have good afternoon, Prince? Oh, we've been waiting for you. Where had you been all this while? We've been into the YT for almost half an hour now. Let's get ahead on this. We're almost on question number 4. Please begin. And we do have the answers as well. So we have a 2, 1, 4, 3 coming in. Let's try begin with reading. The other ones, of course, can punch in your answers until then. Let's go. Now, for chemical pollutants in the environment, 2. The damming of rivers to invasive species transported through global trade and travel. Every environmental issue is different and there is no single tech solution that can solve this crisis. Okay. Now this simply goes to talk about the bandwidth. कि from this to this ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है which can help solve this crisis. But अभी हमें ये तो पता नहीं है कौन सी crisis है. तो 1 तो मेरा opener नहीं है. किसी का भी 1 नहीं था. Okay. Next. Discourse on the threat of the environmental collapse revolves around cutting down emission, but biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are caused by myriad and diverse reasons. So discourse basically is to have very heavy discussions around it. So now that on the threat of the environmental collapse, ये तो बहुत ही ज़्यादा होता है. But biodiversity and loss of ecosystem are caused by a lot of diverse reasons. Myriad is also a lot. So बहुत सारे reasons से होता है. So maybe second does look like an opener for us because it's telling me that, these are what needs to be put up for discussion. So let's reserve, although I don't know yet because I'll have to read the other ones. Now this would, अब ये इससे भी नहीं start हो सकता because यहाँ पे मुझे trigger word मिल गया this is a pronoun. So obviously this मतलब किसी को तो demonstrate कर रहा होगा ना ये. So this would require legislation that recognizes the right of the future generations and the other species that allow the judiciary to uphold a much higher standard of environmental protection than currently is possible. So this is more about, you know, how we are going to be able to give them what they want. Legitimize कैसे करना है and कैसे जो future generation है जो हकदार है उनको कैसे करना है. तो ये तो थोड़ा सा ना end का लग रहा है because अभी तक हमने उस पर कोई बात नहीं की है. Clearly, our environmental crisis requires large political solutions, not minor technological ones. So instead of focusing on infinite growth, we could consider a path of stable state economies while preserving market and healthy competition. Okay. So of the lot, the one thing that we did discuss was, one we were right about it, कि भाई start तो मुझे 2 से ही करना है, right? जैसे ही मैंने बात कर दिया कि it is about the collapse that are caused by myriad of diverse reasons, the next will be what can be the reasons? From chemical pollutants in the environment to the damming of rivers. So from this to this, bandwidth बता रहे हैं ना reasons के. So definitely 2 and 1 तो mandatory pair है. 2 and 1 is not going anywhere. Now that I simply talk about, there is no solution, single tech solution that can solve this crisis. This crisis, of course, is the environmental crisis that is going to happen. And जैसे ही मैंने अब बता दिया कि there is no single solution, right? So what is going to be? Of course, then the next statement over here is going to be clearly our environmental crisis requires larger political, not minor technical ones. Tech और tech आ गया ना यहाँ पे. Where did the tech go? So ये दोनों तो हमारे क्या हो गए? So if we just see the two words, this word over here, sorry, and this word over here, of course make it a mandatory pair. So we know for a fact that both of these two statements have to be together. अब हमने इसमें बता दिया while preserving the market and making a healthy competition, और इन सब को कैसे कर सकते हैं आप effectively? This would require legislation that recognizes the right. And इन सब को करने के लिए हमें क्या चाहिए? हमें proper laws चाहिए. तभी ये चीज effectively implement होगी. So the last one being statement 3. So the correct version is, or the correct series is going to be 2143. Excellent, Vijay. You got that one right. Guys, I have so many people who are in concurrent viewers list, but nobody is writing in the message answers. Why? There is no judgment whatsoever. Guys, लिखो. गलत होगा, confidence आएगा कि क्यों हुआ है. If you keep it to yourself, you will never have that learning thing. So write. Whatever be the series you want to write, you write. Right? We'll take that up and we'll decide why those two are not going to be an answer at all. So next one, this one, I'm hoping that a lot of you guys are going to punch in your answers. Please go, guys. Question number 5. Start. If you are not confident of what the series is, just give me pairs, give me mandatory, give me something to work with, right? So that I know that you're understanding. So BDAC, All right, okay. Let's just wait for a few more punch-ins. Right, let's go. Now, women may prioritize cooking because they feel they alone are responsible for mediating a toxic and unhealthy food system. So they may prioritize on cooking because they feel that they alone are responsible for mediating. So they are the ones, who have to set aside all of this toxic thing and, ensure that everything is met through. Food is commonly framed through the lens of individual choice. You can choose to eat healthily. So it's always an individual choice. You can always decide whether you wish to choose eat healthily or not. Now, this is particularly so in a neoliberal context where the state has transferred the responsibility for food onto individual customers. And the individualized framing of choice appeals to a popular desire to experience agency but draws away from the structural obstacle that stratify individual food point. Now, first things first, we are simply going to see which of the following pairs are definitely going to be together. So I know for a fact that we talked about individual here, we talked about individual here. So I know that C and D need to be together. Now I don't know if it is C or D or D or C, but I know that they need to be coming in together, right? And I know for a fact that I cannot be beginning with either of it because this says this, and then I have the individualized framing, which means I have to get to why the individualized framing of the food idea has come in. So these are not even my openers, which means between the two, what is going to be the opener? Clearly, the opener is going to be B, right? So I'll also write it in numeric form. So we're going to be beginning with the second statement. Now, food is commonly framed through the lens of the individual choice. You can choose to eat healthily. Now that we have talked about the fact that there is an individual choice, now we knew that two of these statements did continue on the idea of individual choice. So, of course, we'll have to see which of the following. So, in the first statement, you can choose what to eat healthily. And then, of course, the follow up idea will be the individualized framing of the choice because that's the kind of choice that has been talked about. तो देखो choose से निकाल लिया ना मैंने अगला assisting idea. जब आपने बोला choose करना allowed है तो अगला statement choice पे ही तो होगा. Nexus of information, एक से जुड़ी दूसरी information हमेशा आएगी. They need to be glued together. So now that I know next will have to be a D, विच मीन्स यहाँ पे अगर आ गया 4 तो मुझे पता अगर डी था तो सी तो आना ही है, तो उसमें कोई दिमाग लगाने की बात नहीं है. द नेक्स्ट विल ऑफ कोर्स ओवर हियर हैव टू बी सी, विच मेक्स इट 3. तो अल्टीमेटली बचा क्या मेरे पास जब मैंने बात किया दिस इज पर्टिकुलरली सो इन अ न्यू लिबरल कॉन्टेक्स्ट वेयर द स्टेट हैज ट्रांसफर्ड द रिस्पांसिबिलिटी ऑन टू individual consumers. Who are the individual consumers? Women may prioritize, and which is why they tend to prioritize because they feel that they alone are responsible for mediating a toxic and unhealthy food system. So वो नहीं बनाएंगी तो फिर पता नहीं क्या खाएंगे, सब लोग कूड़ा खाएंगे is how they feel. So the last becomes A and the statement over here becomes 1. So the correct series is going to be B, D, A, C. Now just the last two is what had to be flipped. B, D, C, A होगा, A, C नहीं होगा because you can clearly see one word. Word से word जोड़ रहे थे ना, we were building it block by block. And that's how we came to that as an answer. I hope this one's clear as to why this is the series and not the other. Very good job, guys. You guys were almost there. Let's get to the next one. Okay, let's see. So we have 3142 and then we have 4132. Okay, pretty close. Just that one swap of the numerical with the positioning of it, any which ways. Let's begin with what we have. Now, the trajectory of cheerfulness through the self is linked to the history of the word cheer, which comes from an old French meaning face. Okay. Translations of the Bible into vernacular language expanded the noun cheer into a more abstract cheerfulness, something that circulates as an emotional and social quality defining the self in a moral community. Okay, it simply tells us कि उसको translate करते तो कैसे cheer से cheerfulness बना. ठीक है. When you take on a cheerful expression, no matter what the state of your soul, your cheerfulness moves into the self. The interior of the self is changed by the power of cheer. Okay, makes sense. And people in the medieval Canterbury tales have a piteous or a sober cheer. Cheer is an expression or a body part lying at the intersection of emotions and physiognomy. So that is what all of the statements are about, the cheerfulness and how it tends to be. So of the lot, I know for a fact that I need to be starting with a 3. Why 3? Because 3 happens to be the only statement wherein it talks about what cheerfulness does. The moment you take on the expression, no matter what state your soul is in. So the moment you take this word upon yourself, the cheerfulness actually moves into the self. The interior of the self is changed by the power. And the interior, that is from within, you tend to be changing to a state of cheer. And that is what all of this transition is. Which means the next idea will have to be about the change. So कोई भी ऐसा word जो synonymous है change के लिए वो क्या बन गया अपना? Trajectory. Right? It just comes into you and then over here it says no, you're changed by the power of the cheer. So ये क्या है? ये पूरी trajectory, ये path क्या है? So first आ गया बस मेरा, एक से लगा दूसरा. So the trajectory of cheerfulness through the self is linked to the history of the word cheer, which comes from the old French meaning face. That is, it comes from an old word which means which is a French word which means the face. Which means post this, what are we going to do? We are going to again get back to, of course, the olden times. Now, between 4 and 2, we'll read these two just to know which one needs to come next. Translations to the Bible into vernacular language expanded the noun cheer into. Now, we're talking about the noun here, how this was translated into multiple languages, but that's not what we want. We want to talk about how the face has something to do with it, or, you know, the kind of history that this word carries. So the next, I mean, once we have a 1, the next statement over here will have to be a 4. Because the 4 says people in the medieval Canterbury tales have a piteous or a sober cheer. Cheer is an expression or a body part, which means, of course, in alignment with the idea of face. Right? अभी face पे अपने physicality पे बात की तो अगला statement physicality को ही तो extend करेगा. Lying at the intersection of emotions and physiognomy. Now that you have talked about it's at the intersection of it, translations of the Bible into vernacular languages expanded the noun cheer into more abstract cheerfulness, something that circulates as an emotional and social. आ गया ना? Emotion यहाँ पे पकड़ा, emotional यहाँ पे पकड़ा, so obviously both of these have to come together, which means the next will have to be a 2. So यहाँ पे हम लोग क्या कर रहे हैं guys? बहुत ही simple है. छोटे-छोटे words पकड़ रहे हैं and we are dragging our ideas together. We're just trying to get them, plot them together, and this is what the series is. The series is going to be 3, 1, 4, 2. हमेशा trigger words पहले underline कर लो and then see which of the following do you think is likely to be an answer. So it's not going to be 4, 1, 3, 2 and it's not going to be 2, 1, 4, 3. I hope everybody understands why we have what we have. Let's get on to the next. Okay, guys, I'm so sorry. Sometimes, you know, it's like I lurk from the sides. So I'm sure even while doing the white, you must be seeing this is like a very slight hint of me peeping into it. So I generally peep to see how many people have written in the chat box and that whether I can begin or not. But I know it sounds very creepy when I'm sort of just peeping and seeing what it is. So minus all that, okay? Get your concentration here. Chalo, agla wala. Please repeat it. Acha. Guys, we're going to go back to the earlier one. एक बार विजय आपका series देखते हैं. So you want to start with 4 and then you want to end with a 2. Okay. Now आपका end तो समझ में आ गया ना कि you're wanting to end with a 2. तो सबसे पहले अभी हम लोग 2 का mandatory pair बनाते हैं. आपने जो 2 का mandatory pair है वो बनाया है 3. Right? Now, the reason why 3 will not be the mandatory pair is because if you see over here, जो मेरा statement है that is about 2. 2 tends to be talking about the emotional aspect of it, right? I'll just give you one hint over here. If you see, इसने किस चीज पे बात की? इसने इमोशनल एंड सोशल क्वालिटी पे बात की ना. तो जब आपने इमोशनल और सोशल क्वालिटी पे बात की, विच मीन्स इसका जो भी लगे में लगा आइडिया, उसको भी ये इमोशनल बात ही करनी है ना. इट हैज टू टॉक अबाउट द इमोशनल एस्पेक्ट ऑफ द पर्सन. नाउ ऑफ ऑल ऑफ द स्टेटमेंट्स, व्हाट वाज द वन स्टेटमेंट दैट डिड हैव द इमोशंस? So I know that 4 and 2 have to be together. Either it be 2 and 4 or 4 and 2, isn't it? Now both of those two of course have to come together. अब सबसे पहले आपकी गड़बड़ क्या हुई? आपने 4 और 2 एकदम ही अलग कर दिया. It can't happen. जब एक मुद्दे पे बात करना चालू करते तो उसमें लगे में लगी सारी बात करनी होती है ना. तो जब आपने इंट्रोड्यूस कर दिया कि this is something that lies at the intersection of emotion and the physiognomy, which means the next should be talking about the emotional quality that it has. And then we talk about the physiognomy of it. But that's not, शायद 2 के बाद जो actual script में sentence होगा वो अगला physiognomy में भी चला जाएगा. But ये तो मेरा किस में आएगा? This will have to of course be towards the emotional aspect of it. तो ये दोनों तो मेरे mandatory pairs हैं ही ना. आपके तो यहीं पे वो अलग हो गए, right? Second, your pair was 1 and 3. You want to begin with a 4 and then you want to make a 1 and 3. Now that again can't be. Why? Because it will have to be 3 and 1. पहले ये तो बताओ कि पाथ है, फिर तो उसकी ट्रैजेक्टरी पे बात करोगे. सो व्हेन आई टॉक अबाउट इज चेंज्ड बाय द पावर ऑफ द चेयर. सो जब मैंने चेंज बोला तो चेंज क्या है? अब एक इंसान से दूसरे इंसान या एक मूड से दूसरे मूड गए तो ये क्या है? एक ट्रैजेक्टरी तो है. आपका मूड ऐसे चेंज हुआ, पैराबोला है ना उसका. सो ऑब्वियसली जब आप ट्रैजेक्टरी की बात करोगे तो पहले चेंज की तो बात करो, तब तो आप उसका रास्ता बताओगे. एक पॉइंट से दूसरे पॉइंट पे गए तब तो रास्ता बताया ना. सो ऑब्वियसली इट विल हैव टू बी 3 and a 1. It cannot be 1 and a 3 then. So मुझे पता है 3 and 1 एक साथ है और मुझे पता है ये दोनों एक साथ है. उसके बाद I just have to try a couple of permutations. Is that clear to you now, Vijay? Do you understand why we have what we have? Okay, I hope that's gotten through. Let's do the next one. Please start. Okay, all right, then let's read the statements here and see. Now, if I wanted to sit outdoors and read or play Sonic the Hedgehog on a red hot Sega Mega Drive, I would often be made to feel guilty about not going outside to enjoy it while it lasts. तो मतलब कोई इसको वही बोलता था, गिल्ट देता था, कहता था यार बाहर चले जाओ, enjoy it while it lasts, बाद में नहीं होगा तो क्या कर लोगे. Okay. My mom quite reasonably wanted me and my sister out of the house in the sun. Right. Tale of my mum's idyllic sounding childhood in the Sussex countryside where trees were climbed by 8 a.m. and streams navigated by lunchtime were passed down upon us like folklore. Folklore is kahavate, like these stories. So that's how it is. So back in Sussex इनके countryside में उसकी मम्मी के ऑथर की मम्मी के घर पे क्या होता था, 8 बजे तक पेड़ चढ़ना है और बाय लंच टाइम तक तो आपको स्ट्रीम्स क्रॉस करके आ जाना है. To an introverted kid, that felt like a threat. The feeling that has stayed with me. So that felt like a threat. मतलब it has to be a threat. What will have to be a threat of the Lord? यही threat है. Enjoy it while it lasts. So that हो गया तो pronoun हो गया, which means चाहे जो भी हो, I know that मेरा एक पैर तो मुझे मिल गया, which is A and D, which is going to be 1 and 4. Right? ये तो है. अब पूरे स्टेटमेंट पढ़ने में हमको पता चल जाता है कि एक बहुत ही ब्यूटीफुल सी लाइन है, which is going to open the idea, which will have to be C, right? Because it's trying to be talking about the tales that one has. Okay. Now, since we know that all of the statement tends to be talking about the author only, which means हमें ऐसे आइडिया का ट्रांजिशन करना है कि ऑथर की मम्मी से ऑथर पे और उसके बहन पे गया एंड देन फाइनली उस पे गया. So the series is going to be the tales of it, of course, were passed down like folklore. My mom quite reasonably, because this is where the mom stays in the as a protagonist, as the subject. उसके बाद तो I पे शिफ्ट हो गए ना, तो अब लास्ट में मम को नहीं डाल सकते, बिकॉज जब एक सब्जेक्ट पे बात करना चालू करते हैं तभी तो उस पे कंटिन्यू करते हैं. So obviously my mom quite reasonably wanted me and my sister out of the house in the sun. So that makes sense, which means the next should be B. And then she wanted them out in the sun. If I wanted to sit, so obviously if क्यों आया, ये contingency क्यों आई कि तुम बाहर रहो, पर अगर मुझे अंदर बैठना हुआ तो ऑब्वियसली इफ वाला कंडीशन तो तभी आएगा ना जब उसके पहले एक रिस्ट्रिक्शन होगा, तभी तो वो इफ आएगा. So that means A makes sense over here and ultimately followed by D. So the correct sequence is going to be 3, 2, 1, 4 or C, B, A, D. Okay, I hope everybody understands why we have a C and a B and it's not going to be B and C. राइट. फोकलोर मतलब कहानियों में सुनाया गया है या हमारे घर में ऐसे कहानियों में चलता रहता है कि कैसे मम्मी का विलेज था, कंट्री साइड था. एंड देन ऑफ कोर्स इट्स अ प्रॉपर डिपिक्शन ऑफ how things were exactly in her countryside, that is the Sussex, which is why our series becomes the one that we have. I hope this one's clear. Let's move on to the next. Oh, oh Gaurav, I'm a faculty. If I don't have good comprehension skills, you will come and doubt me कि ऐसा क्यों है. But पता है, actually, I had a very lengthy approach to Parajumbles initially. So I also used to be like, read all the sentences, reread. I used to never chase the catchwords. But this is what has to be done, especially when it's a Tita version. Catchwords आप जितनी effectively पकड़ोगे ना, उतने अच्छे से you will get the sequence. So mandatory pairs of course banate, ultimately it's logic that prevails. It can't just be my hunch and all things that look nice to me, but it is the mandatory pairs that have been put to so much of use with so much of conduction of classes. So I take that as a compliment that you write that my comprehension skills are really good, but that's actually because if I don't have that, then you guys are going to just like chuck me out. It'd be like क्या ही पढ़ा रही है, इसको तो कुछ पता ही नहीं है. So let's keep that untouched. Get on to the next one, please. विजय, इनएविटेबल का मतलब होता है जो चीज होके ही रहेगी. थिंग्स दैट यू कांट, समथिंग दैट कांट बी अवॉइडेड, दैट इज इनएविटेबल. जैसे पैराजम्बल्स कैट में इनएविटेबल है, आएंगे ही आएंगे. आरसी इनएविटेबल है, राइट? दैट इज व्हाट इट मीन्स. Right, then let's begin. And how should we improve our vocabulary? So, Gaurav, I hope you are a reader. Now, for English, by default, reading goes a long way. And it's one of the most underestimated activities, but the only immunity to comprehension, to weak comprehension and vocabulary. So, get into reading. Religious reading, I think that will do wonders for you. Okay, let's get to the next. So, we have a 3, 2, 1, and 4, and I am so impressed. That is what the answer is. So, for the very first time, I will not read it through. I will only read it with your options because you guys have gotten that absolutely correct. Please pat your shoulders. You've done a good job there. Let's see. Mediocracy is an organizing principle. As an organizing principle is an inevitable function of a free society as we are designed to see our achievement as worthy of a reward. Yes, that is what we're going to begin with. We then have two, but the raft of recent books about the limits of merit, right? Of course, since you're talking about the achievement as worthy of reward, then of course it continues, and the merit is an important correction to the arrogance of the contemporary entitlement and an opportunity to reassert the importance of luck, grace, and our thinking. Makes sense. Next is one. The more we are able to accept that our achievements are largely out of control, the easier it becomes to understand that our failures and those of the others are too. Once you introduce the idea of what failures are, so in turn, you should increase our humility and with respect. To be humility or respect others, obviously it's about embracing your flaws. It cannot be about the achievement, right? Which will treat our fellow citizens, helping ultimately to build a more compassionate society. And the last one becomes four. Very good job there, guys. I am superbly impressed with you guys. I think you're now getting a hang of it. Let's try the next one. The ninth question. Please start. Okay, let's see what do we have. So we have a 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, almost there. A slight slip, but we'll figure out what it is. Now we'll read all of the statements first. Of course, various industrial sectors, including retail, transit system, enterprise, educational institution, event organizing, finance, travel, etc., have now started leveraging these beacons. These, which means I'm not starting with one. Beacon solutions to track and communicate with their customers. Okay. A beacon fixed on to a shop wall enables the retailers to assess the proximity of the customer and to come up with a much targeted or personalized communication like offers, discount combos on products in each shelf. Okay, now this is telling us how a shopkeeper can assist oneself with better communication. अभी तक इसका ब्रेक थ्रू नहीं मिला है कि कौन सी लाइन से ये बात आई, तो अभी टू ना is hanging in mid air. So we know what two talks about, but we can't assign ourselves what exactly is it. Smartphones and other mobile devices can capture the beacon signals, and distance can be estimated by measuring received signal strength. Okay, now if you see, the third statement also furthers onto the idea of how the smartphones can actually help assist. And beacons are tiny and inexpensive micro level based technology devices that can send radio frequency signals and notify nearby Bluetooth devices in their presence and transmit information. So we know for a fact that we're going to be beginning with a 4 because it talks about what beacons are. Everybody did start with a 4, which makes sense. Now, followed by 4, of course, now that we've talked about how these are little things in the phone, the next should be in continuation to the phone. So there's only one line that talks about it. So, of course, 4 and 3 are hands down a mandatory pair. So it simply talks about that they can capture the beacon signals and distance can be estimated by measuring received signal strength. Now that we have that, the next idea is going to be now between 1 and 2. If you see, you all had 1 and 2 being the no, we had 2 and 1, and then okay, Priya has 1 and 2 coming in. Now that we've talked about how they receive the signal strengths, now first what is going to come is as to how many people are using it. Why? Because if you see question number statement number 2, it says the beacon fixed on a shop wall enables the retailer to assess. But ये सिर्फ retail में ही तो नहीं काम होता है ना, ये काम तो सब जगह होता है. अब it's always general to specific. पहले आप बताओ उसका wide range, the broad spectrum वो कहाँ कहाँ use होता है, और फिर specifically वो कैसे shop wall में लग सकता है and how it can enable them to get better with the customers. Also यहाँ पे personalized customer है and these are best solutions to track and communicate with their customers. And how do you do that? With a personalized approach. So it's not going to be a 2 and a 1 everybody. It's in fact going to be a 1 and a 2 that comes in together. The correct sequence only 4, 3, 1, 2. हमेशा याद रखना पहले सारी बात होती है फिर एक. तो अगर मैंने बोला India is rich in cultural, political, religious and topographical diversity. उसके बाद में उसकी टोपोग्राफी पे या उसके कल्चर पे बात कर सकती हूँ. आई कांट स्पीक अबाउट वन एंड देन टॉक अबाउट हाउ इंडिया हैज एन एरे ऑफ डाइवर्स ऑप्शंस टू इटसेल्फ. जनरल देन ऑलवेज स्पेसिफिक. तो यहाँ पे पहले मैंने बात किया कितनी इंडस्ट्रीज उसको यूज कर रही है कैसे वो हेल्प कर रहा है एनहांस करने में कम्युनिकेशन. फॉर वन फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर हम रिटेल में स्पेसिफिकली बात करें तो वो कैसे असेस करेगा. हमेशा याद रखना दिस इज हाउ द रूल इज सपोज टू बी. सो द सीक्वेंस इज 4, 3, 1 and 2, not 2 and 1. So I hope Priya and Vijay. So Priya changed her sequence though, but I hope Vijay understands as to why we have that as a sequence. And with that, let's get to the next. Now, I'm not going to do this because these are odd sentences. I will come back to it, but later. We are going to focus ourselves to be doing the parajumbles. Let's begin, guys. The 12th one. Please start. Okay. Do we have the answers? No, not yet. So I'm just going to like, you're not getting it. It's all right. Let me do this one live with you guys so that you understand. So first things first, let's read the information and see what does it have for us. Now, what precisely are the unusual elements that make a particular case so attractive to a certain kind of audience? So it's asking, ऐसा क्या है इतना unusual सा क्या रहता है वो element जो कोई एक particular case को बड़ा interesting बना देता है? It must be a particularly savage or unfathomable level of depravity. Very often, it has something to do with the precise amount of the mystery involved. To which it goes about by saying it might be particularly, it's going to be about probably एक बहुत ही कोई savage है, कोई unfathomable मतलब जो चीज आप समझ भी नहीं पाते. Level of depravity होगी, which often has something to do with the precise amount of mystery. So now, if you actually see 1 and 2 makes a mandatory pair, right? It's a question and answer. तो इट सेज ये कौन सा अनयूजुअल एलिमेंट है जो एक सर्टेन काइंड ऑफ ऑडियंस को पसंद है तो विच दे से वो जो अनफैथमेबल अमाउंट ऑफ डेप्रेविटी होती है ना ये शायद एक ऐसी चीज है जो प्रिसाइज अमाउंट में एक मिस्ट्री में इन्वॉल्व होती है एंड दैट इज व्हाट दे वांट सो दिस इज अ क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर एंड आई नो 1 and 2 is definitely going along with the fact so we'll keep both of these two together now unsolved and perhaps unsolvable case offers something that ordinary murder doesn't which means we're now trying to be talking about the fact that there is something more that is offered to it, which the other ones don't. So of course it's going to be about the mystery involved and what is going to be the mystery कोई भी unsolved होती है या perhaps unsolvable होती है so that is what it has. So now I know that 1, 2 and 3 are coming together. इतना तो पक्का है क्योंकि इसी सीरीज में इट्स लाइक अ क्वेश्चन आंसर एंड द एलिमेंट ऑफ इट अब 4 या तो यहाँ लगेगा या तो यहाँ लगेगा डिसाइड कर लेते हैं why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others locked into permanent obscurity clearly we will begin with the 4 a lot of times guys हमें शायद देखा कितनी बार हम लोग नहीं देखते it's like a list of interrogations before the idea begins why is this happening what is there why do we have to do it so it's like that so it's like why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others locked up in permanent obscurity obscure means something that is arcane one doesn't unknown so कुछ एकदम ही हट जाते हैं और कुछ एकदम perpetual re-examination people go on and on again to which what precisely are the unusual elements that make a particular case so attractive क्यों इनको बार बार re-examine करें भाई क्यों audience इतना attracted है उनसे इट माइट बी अ पर्टिकुलरली सैविज तो कुछ तो उसमें होगा ना बड़ा सैविज सा होगा कुछ अनफैथमेबल कोई मिस्ट्री ऐसी इन्वॉल्व होगी जो नहीं पता होगी अनसॉल्व परहैप्स अनसॉल्वेबल केसेस वो अनसॉल्व होगी परहैप्स इसीलिए वो बोल रहा है कि अनसॉल्वेबल केसेस जो होते हैं ना जो लगता है सॉल्व ही नहीं हो पाएंगे दैट ऑर्डिनरी मर्डर में नहीं होता है वो जो एलिमेंट होता है दैट इज व्हाट कीप्स इट गोइंग सो दिस इज हाउ द entire sequence is it's a 4 1 2 and 3 did everybody understand now सबको समझ में आया ये वाला how is it that we did it now an unlucky number but lucky for some question number 13 now this is going to be our last parajumble for the day so give it all you got let's end with a bang so we're going to ensure that this one gets right now I know there are about 10 more questions that remain but like I said it's because we started late and of course it is a follow-up marathon which means in about 10 minutes of break time you will have another faculty come in with odd sentence parajumbles so stick in there hold in tight finish up with the marathon whatever I have which I could not complete I'm going to come back again I'm going to bother you guys again so please be ready for that that's not going to be something which will just happen I've given you a heads up that this is going to happen soon but having said that let us get on to the last one and finish this one on to the 13th question please start everybody There is focus hour session. Yeah, that's the theme of the marathon that we have today. Oh, you have a focus hour session, which is it coinciding with the YT? Is that what it is, Tanishka? I know that you have all of these focus hours that are beginning. If you want, I can always have that checked. Okay, on to the last one, everybody. Please give in your answers. Let's finish with this one last and then begin. Do we have the answers? All right, we'll just wind this up quickly so that you can go and be attending the focus hours as well. Give me an opener, guys. What do you think you want to begin with? Does this fit in the screen? Okay, all right, let's go. Now, algorithms hosted on the internet are accessed by many. So biases in AI model have resulted in much larger impact, adversely affecting far larger groups of people. It says, though algorithm bias is a popular term, the foundation of such bias is not in algorithm but in the data. Algorithms are not biased. Data is as algorithms merely reflect persistent patterns that are present in the training data. Okay, we understand the information so far. Now, despite their widespread impact, so of course I know what is the widespread impact. The widespread impact over here will have to be about, the persistent patterns and the algorithm bias that is there. It is relatively easier to fix AI biases than human generated biases, as it is simpler to identify the former than to try and make people unlearn behaviors learned over generations. So it is, and the foundation. So I know that between 2 and 3, they are definitely a mandatory pair, with 2 and 3 coming first, because the moment I say despite their widespread impact, so what is there? It is the bias. Okay, now the impact of biased decisions made by human is localized and geographically confined, but with the advent of AI, the impact of such decision is spread over much wider scale. Now, as much as you guys do want to begin with one, it's not going to begin with one, guys. It's going to begin with a 4. Because 4 actually goes to say, it's, with the advent of the AI, the impact of such decision is spread on a much wider scale. And what be the wider scale? The wider scale will have a larger impact. It doesn't go the other way. It's not an effect and cause. It's always a cause and effect that come together. So algorithms hosted on the internet are accessed by many. So biases in AI model have resulted in a much larger impact, adversely affecting large group. You have to talk about the bandwidth, again, the larger scale of it, to be able to talk about the kind of impact and the adverse effect that it's going to have. So 4 and 1 become the mandatory pair. The moment you introduce the idea of how these AI models tend to be resulting, that is where we begin with the algorithmic bias, which is there, and ultimately, obviously talking about, it's easier to fix than to fix human generated bias. Humans का करना difficult है, algorithm में तो फिर भी easy है. So complicated statements at that, but अगर थोड़ा सा hint पकड़ लेते, तो one thing would have led to the other, and the series is going to be 4, 1, 2, and 3. And with that, we will have to call it a day. I hope the 10 questions or the 12 questions that we did do have been absolutely clear. You understood why, how, and what got the statements together. Parajumbles is more about logic, less about all things around reading. So even if your reading is a little fleeting in nature, that is आप भूलते जा रहे हो क्या है, but if you have been able to make a strong nexus of the statements, you will always, steer through any confusion that can come. Options के साथ easy होता है, without the options gets difficult, which is why a best practice to parajumbles always start with the options and eventually move on to the non-option based, so that it's more assistive and you know exactly what needs to be done. And with that, it's going to be me signing off. Like always, it was an absolute pleasure taking, of course, conducting a class for you. I will see you guys very soon with the remaining set of questions that we have, and I hope until then you're going to practice and get up more, so that the next time we're doing, you all have absolute correct answers, and that we have an inflatable pride that, of course, cannot be settled, not at least until we finish with the cat papers. Thank you so much, everyone. And there's going to be a break time of about 10-12 minutes. Anybody who is not attending the focus hours can, of course, get refreshed, take a break, stretch, have some tidbits, and come back, because you have another power pack session that waits for you, continuing the soon after the break time that we have. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so very much.
Namaste everyone and welcome to Supergrads Cats. I'm Shruti and I welcome you all to the series of PYQs, previous year questions of CAT. So we have been solving previous year questions in quants, DILR as well as VARC. In the series, we have taken a few concepts and discussed those concepts in, applying them in the form of solving PYQs along with you. So these are live sessions, and I welcome you all to this session on odd man out or odd one out, which has been a very regular feature of CAT paper or VARC section for quite a few years now. So waiting for a few more to join, and then we can start with the discussion of the questions. By the time everyone joins in the session, let's have a little chit chat about what all this variety is and how to get about this, and how to approach these questions. I'm very sure that just before this session, you had a very warm, cozy kind of session with Suyukti ma'am on how to approach parajumbles in CAT. So this is just a way ahead of that, an extension to that. Parajumble का ही एक साथी या कह सकते हैं जुड़वा बहन है, odd one out, ठीक है? Something which is very very similar in the context or the texture of the question. So parajumble में हम लोगों ने क्या सीखा था, क्या देखा था? Parajumble में there are certain sentences which are jumbled up and you have to sequence them up. All right, so the same thing applies in odd one out as well, that there are jumbled up sentences, but then there are no four sentences, there are five sentences. And out of those five sentences, you have to identify which one is not suitable and which is not going in sync with the entire sequence or the logical flow of the paragraph. So you have to identify the odd one. All right. So the first thing is that these are theta questions. Now, what is theta question? I am sure you know this. Theta is type in the answer. That means there are no options given, and that's the troublesome thing. All right, they do not give you options to choose from. Had they given options, then probably you would have done it very quickly. All right, but without option, it becomes a little heavier. Not as heavy or as complicated as parajumbles, but a little easier. All right. So the best part of theta question is that there are no negative marks. So obviously that we are more tempted toward these questions because there are no negative marks. Even if we go wrong, we are not penalized with -1. All right, so that's the benefit of these questions. Looks easier than other VA questions like parasummary, paracompletion, parajumbles. A little intriguing. You have to read a lot, and odd one out becomes a little, popcorn kind of that you just pick it up, browse through, scroll through, and you can get the answer. At least that's what the perception of students is about odd one out questions. Not very far from the reality actually, but at times they could be really challenging. Like अगर मैं CAT 2024 की बात करूं तो काफी सारे लोगों को झटका तो पड़ा था, ठीक है? Also, there were no parajumbles in CAT 2024, but odd one out were not that easy, all right, as they used to be earlier. All right. The biggest problem with this is it can be a time killer. That means the productive time which you could have invested in solving some other question variety, which could have given you 3 marks plus 3 marks, you might end up getting a 0 mark and waste a lot of time if you're not very alert about not getting into it. All right. So these are few of the problems which I have identified while interacting with students. So many students come to me, and while mentoring them, I've come across that these are the major problems that students face while taking their mocks. Mock cats are now, rolling on, and a lot of people from across the states of the country are taking these supercat mocks from top rankers. and they generally face these problems while taking this, while solving this question that is odd one out. So these are the major concerns which I could identify. First is that they are not clear with the context of the paragraph. All right. Probably odd one out में अधिकतर लोगों को लगता है कि हमें ज़्यादा context की तरफ जाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. I can just browse through it, identify the verbal hints. जो verbal hints से match नहीं कर रहा, that should be the answer. And that's where they get trapped. Because see, there is a difference between a CMAT and a CAT, and the level of difficulty of the question obviously varies. So you cannot have an approach which you will apply in a SNAP or a CMAT to solve the questions in CAT and XAT. So that has to be, that understanding has to be developed. All right. So context is something which CAT and XAT is obviously testing you on. कि तुम्हें कितना समझ में आ रहा है. फ्लो ऑफ आइडिया जब तक इंटैक्ट नहीं है, यू विल नॉट बी एबल टू सॉल्व पैराजम्बल्स और ऑड वन आउट क्वेश्चंस. ऑलराइट. Not able to identify the opening or the closing sentence. So this is more relevant in parajumble questions rather than the odd one out questions. Parajumbles में it's very important कि आप opening और closing sentence को identify करो. Odd one out में if you are able to identify opening or closing sentence, you are able to understand the context or the flow of the idea, and then you are able to segregate the odd one out. But it's not mandatory as such. But yes, in parajumbles, very, very important. Pairing is good, but sequencing goes wrong. Again, as I told you, that in parajumbles, you have to get into the proper sequencing part. But that's not the case in odd one out. So please do not apply the approach of parajumble solving in solving odd one out questions. You don't have to sequence them. All right, you don't have to sequence the sentences in order to get the odd one out. Only flow of ideas should be your concern. Only the topic should be your concern. All right. Able to solve in class, but not getting accuracy in mocks. That's the most troublesome thing. And no marks for guessing this. That why this is happening. क्लास में भाई तुम्हें टेंशन नहीं है. क्लास में तुम बिल्कुल रिलैक्स मोड में बैठे हो, दिमाग बिल्कुल एक्टिव है, फ्रेश है. लेकिन मॉक ले रहे हो तो स्ट्रेस में बैठे हुए हो. बहुत सारे लोग साथ में बैठ के मॉक दे रहे हैं. वो फील आता है सेंटर पे मॉक देने से कि हाँ एंजाइटी बढ़ी हुई है, प्रेशर है और टाइम इज रनिंग. सो अंडर प्रेशर परफॉर्मेंस ऑब्वियसली dwindles. तो वहां पर दिमाग इतना ज्यादा कैच नहीं कर पाता, या हड़बड़ाहट में यू मेक सिली मिस्टेक्स. ठीक है. Eats away your productive time and return on investment is zero. Why zero? Because it's a theta question. So obviously मार्क्स में पेनल्टी तो नहीं है, लेकिन हाँ प्रोडक्टिव टाइम बहुत ज्यादा तुम वेस्ट कर बैठते हो. एंड मतलब यू माइट नॉट इवन गो रीच दोज क्वेश्चंस जो कि काफी इजी हैं और काफी प्रोडक्टिव हो सकते थे. ठीक है. सो we'll be dealing with these scenarios and situations, and we'll be dealing with these problems while we are discussing these questions from PYQ. So today I am here with questions from previous year questions of CAT. We'll try and solve as many as possible, 24, 23, 22 and so on and so forth. जितना time allot हमें allow कर देगा. So 6 questions each year we have. So we have plenty of questions to practice from. Let's begin without wasting time. So are you all with me? Give me a thumbs up if you want me to start straight away. Or if you have any doubt before we start, please throw it on me. I'll be happy to answer. Okay, Tanishka, Vijay, Sumit, Sujal. Okay. The voice is cracking or the volume is low? Okay, let me check. Hello, hello. Am I audible now? Is the voice clear now? All right. So let's start with the questions. Now, the first thing which you should keep in mind is please read the directions very, very carefully because for past at least 3 4 years there have been several incidences wherein students have ended up giving an answer of parajumble, that means sequencing an odd one out question. All right, so probably that's the first lesson that you have to learn, and that is read the directions properly. In odd one out, you have to answer only one digit. Whereas in Theta Parajumbles, you have to type in all the 4 digits or the 4 numbers. All right, do not repeat this mistake which your seniors have done earlier. All right, so read the direction that this is the identify the odd sentence and key in the number that sentence as your answer. So this is the odd one out. So you have to key in only one number. What is more important is 5 jumbled up sentences related to a topic. That means all the sentences are related to one topic. One is not related to the topic, relevant to the topic. All right, so you have to identify that particular sentence which is not relevant to the topic. So you're not supposed to sequence the entire, all these sentences. You have to just identify the theme, the topic, and see the 4 sentences which are relevant to the topic and one which is irrelevant to the topic. So what is more important is the context and not sequencing. All right. So without sequencing the sentences, you can actually identify the odd sentence out without wasting much time. Every question you can try and solve within 60 to 90 seconds or maybe 120 seconds, not more than that. All right. So try this question then, and then we'll have a discussion. All right. So any answers? All right. So animals have an interest in fulfilling their basic needs, but also in avoiding suffering and thus we ought to extend moral consideration. So animals have an interest in fulfilling their basic needs and avoid suffering. So this sentence is talking about these two things which animals are interested in. Singer viewed himself as a utilitarian and presents a direct moral theory concerning animals' rights in contrast to indirect positions such as welfarist views. So it is Singer view as a utilitarian and present a direct moral theory for animal rights. He argued for extending moral consideration to animals because, similar to human, animals have certain significant interests. So, this is extending moral consideration to animals. The event that publicly announced animal rights as a legitimate issue within contemporary philosophy was Peter Singer's Animal Liberation text in 1975. So this is actually talking about an event, and the name of the event, uh, uh, Animal Liberation, and the name of the author, Peter Singer. So probably these three sentences are completely linked because they are all talking about Peter Singer. As such, we ought to view their interests alongside and equal to human interests. So their interest implies to animal interest, which results in humans having direct moral duties towards animals. So when we look at these sentences, we clearly find that 2, 3, and 4 are interlinked. 4 seems to be the opening sentence because it is introducing the author's complete name and the event wherein this concept was introduced. Then he says that he himself viewed as a utilitarian and present a direct moral theory concerning animal rights in contrast to indirect positions. And then he argued for extending moral consideration for animals because animals have certain significant interests. And these significant interests have been talked about in 5. As such, we ought to view their interest alongside and equal to human interest, which result in human having direct moral duties. So this seems to be the odd one out because although it is talking about interest of animals, but one, it is talking about an interest. Second, it is actually talking about interests which are not even talked about here. Also seems to be relevant and related. Animals have an interest. This also is talking about animals having significant interest. This also talking about animals having their interest alongside. But it is talking about interest equal to human beings. Whereas this is specifically talking about basic interest of basic needs and avoiding suffering. So this is something which is the odd one out. All right, let's move to the next one. The first thing you're supposed to do is identify the topic or the theme of the sentences. All right, let's discuss the answer or the question. Urbanites are people who live in urban areas. Urbanites also have more and better options for getting around. Uber is ubiquitous and found everywhere commonly. So urbanites also have more and better options for getting around. Uber is ubiquitous, easy to rent dockless bicycles are spreading. Battery powered scooters will be next. So this is basically giving you three ways of moving around without using. I mean, these are better options than something else. When more people use buses or trains, the service usually improves because public transport agencies run more buses and trains. So this is talking about public transportation. Worsening services on public transport, terrorist attacks in some urban metros, and a rise in fares have been blamed for this trend. A rise in fare and terrorist attack blamed for this trend. So this is very, very negative sentence. This is negative sentence. This is talking about worsening services. It seems more likely that public transport is being squeezed structurally. It is being squeezed structurally. As people's need to travel is diminishing as a result of smartphone, video conferences, online shopping, and so on. Again, this is talking about public transportation facility or services getting squeezed or not really relevant, getting diminished. There has been a puzzling decline in the use of urban public transportation in many countries in the West, despite the growth in urban population and rising employment. So very clearly, there are three sentences which are talking about worsening services of public transportation being squeezed, and puzzling decline in the use of public transportation. So we have three sentences which are talking about decline. This is talking about options we have apart from public transportation. In fact, we have better options for that. And only sentence 2 is talking about improving the public transportation. When more people use buses or trains, the services usually improve because public transport agencies run more buses and trains. So rest of the sentences are talking about a problem, whereas this sentence is not even relevant. It is talking about the positives of it. And hence, this is the odd one out. Now you can see that in both the questions which I have discussed with you, I never bothered to give you that sequence or logical flow which is relevant in Parajumble, but that's not the case in odd one out. If you are able to understand the topic well, you can very easily identify the odd sentence out. Don't waste your time in arranging those sentences. In most of the solutions which are given online, or maybe people who generally give explanations, they give the sequence, to you. So I don't think so. Every odd one out question would require the depth of, getting into sequencing. It is only that there are certain questions in CAT which have been that complicated. Otherwise, ज़्यादा करके तो यही है कि टॉपिक समझ में आ जाए, तो टॉपिक में जो रेलेवेंट नहीं है वो दिख जाता है. ठीक है. हाँ, अनलेस कि तुम बहुत ही सुपरफिशियली पढ़ रहे हो कि भाई बस ब्राउज किया, स्किम और स्कैन किया और यू आर एबल टू आइडेंटिफाई, वो नहीं करना है. यू शुड बी एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड दी कॉन्टेक्स्ट कि देखो 3 सेंटेंसेस हैं जो कि किस टॉपिक पे बात कर रहे हैं. दे आर टॉकिंग अबाउट डिक्लाइन इन दी पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्टेशन स्पेशली इन दी अर्बन एरिया. तो ये टॉपिक निकल जाए और उसके बाद फिर क्या रीजंस हैं, क्या बेटर ऑप्शंस है, तो ये रेलेवेंट आपकी स्कीम निकल आती है. तो ऑड वन आउट तुरंत से निकल जाएगा. It should not take more than 60 to 90 seconds. Let's move on to the next question. Try this out. Try and identify the topic. No known real researcher of human behavior would say that gender is all nature or all nurture. Nurture means what? Nurture is palan poshan, ठीक है, and nature is inbuilt. So it is basically saying that gender is natural, biological, or it is getting cultivated by society and family. All right. So it is basically no known real researcher of human behavior. So no researcher of human behavior would say that gender is all nature or all nurture. So it's a mix of both. The evidence for a biological basis for gender certainly doesn't mean we should be complacent in the face of sexism. What is sexism? Sexism is basically discrimination based on gender. Many people are uncomfortable with the idea that gender is not purely a social construct. Despite this empirical truth, researchers who study the biological basis of gender often face political pushback. Here's a political angle. There is a political preference for gender to be only a reflection of social factors and so entirely malleable. Malleable, something which you should actually not appreciate. निंदनीय है, ठीक है, something which you should appreciate. All right. So now when we look at this, what is the topic which comes out? Something like gender, whether it is natural, biological, or it is a social or socially cultivated thing, isn't it? So that's the topic which the author is discussing here. Which is the sentence which doesn't fit here? Because rest of the sentences are talking about the empirical truth of whether it is nature or whether it is nurture. Despite this empirical truth, empirical is something which is based on experience or practical. All right, and that's what this is talking about. इस empirical truth के बावजूद researchers who study the biological basis of gender, they often face the political pushback. Why they face this pushback? The pushback is because of many people are uncomfortable with the idea that gender is not purely social construct. There is a political preference for gender to be only reflection. So these two sentences are clearly linked. So the only odd one out is 2, because this is not talking about social cultivation of gender or the influence on gender. This is talking about discrimination. So gender discrimination is not at all the topic which the author is talking about. It's बहुत ही out of context जा रहा है. So the answer should be 2. All right. Next question. Please try and identify the topic first. That's fine. Don't worry about getting right. Just attempt it. I would expect more answers, more efforts from others as well. Don't be a silent observer. Try and answer as many as possible. All right, let's do it together. The UK is a world leader in developing cultivated meat, and approval of a cultivated pet food is an important milestone. What's a milestone? Milestone किसको कहते हैं? मील का पत्थर, something which is very very significant, worth mentioning. That is a milestone. ठीक है ना? So the first sentence is talking about UK is a world leader in developing cultivated meat, and approval of a cultivated pet food is an important milestone. If we are to realize the full potential benefits of cultivated meat, the government must invest in research and infrastructure. Very well said. If we need to realize full potential of cultivated meat, government needs to invest in research and infrastructure. The first UK applications for cultivated meat produced for humans remain under assessment with Food Standard Agency. The previous UK government had been looking at fast tracking the approval of cultivated meat for human consumption. It underscores the potential for new innovation to help reduce the negative impacts of intensive animal agriculture. So what is this it for? It underscores. What underscores? Underscore का मतलब क्या होता है? Highlight. तो क्या हाईलाइट हो रहा है इनोवेशन के लिए, पोटेंशियल फॉर इनोवेशन के लिए? दिस, क्योंकि यहां पर उसे कहा है क्या? इट्स अ सिग्निफिकेंट माइलस्टोन, इंपॉर्टेंट माइलस्टोन. So the entire paragraph is talking about cultivated meat and approval of cultivated meat, pet food as an important milestone. The entire paragraph is talking about how this is the first UK application for cultivated meat produced for human, and what is the agency which is responsible for that. It is also talking about what is required from the government. Government need to invest in research and infrastructure to realize the full potential. So this is an initiative taken. So nothing about previous UK government had to be taken into consideration. This is something which is out of context, because all the other four sentences are appreciating the milestone achieved by the present government. The present government. All right. And it is the first initiative. All right. So we cannot talk about the previous government, because previous government had been looking at fast tracking the approval of cultivated meat for human consumption. Doesn't fit here. Had the UK government, previous government been doing that, then appreciation of this government would not actually fall. All right. So all the other sentences are talking about the current status, the current government, and not the previous government. So the fourth one is the odd one out. All right, move on to the next question. अब देखो, this particular question is a little, challenging. क्यों? Because the topic, the context of the question is not that common, isn't it? बाकी सब जो पढ़ रहे थे अभी, तो वो कहीं ना कहीं रिलेट कर पा रहे हैं, क्योंकि हम आरसी सॉल्व करते रहते हैं. अब यहाँ पर एक बिल्कुल टेक्निकल उन्होंने एक पैराग्राफ दे दिया विच इज टॉकिंग अबाउट न्यूरॉन्स, द सिनेप्सिस ऑफ न्यूरॉन्स. मतलब न्यूरॉन्स का आपस का इलेक्ट्रिकल जो कनेक्शन होता है, जो कांटेक्ट होता है, उसके ऊपर पूरा पैसेज है. सो दैट बिकम्स अ लिटिल ट्रिकी, है ना? ये चैलेंजिंग क्वेश्चंस हो सकते हैं. सो टू क्रिएट अ सिनेप्स, The neuron has specialized structures often seen as tiny swellings at its terminal end of the axion, where it stores the chemicals that are emitted to transmit a signal to the next neuron. So terminal end में एक्सियन होता है जो कि केमिकल स्टोर करता है और वो केमिकल्स क्या करते हैं, दे ट्रांसमिट अ सिग्नल टू द नेक्स्ट न्यूरॉन. This fetal warm-up act, the soldiering of neural connections before the eyes actually function, is crucial to the performance of visual system. So this fetal warm-up, fetal is related to fetus, भ्रूण जिसको बोलते हैं. जब बच्चा अनबॉर्न है उसको fetus कहते हैं. तो जब वो fetus में ही है, fetal warm-up ही है, तभी उसके न्यूरल कनेक्शंस जो हैं वो उनकी सोल्डरिंग होने चालू हो जाती है. सोल्डरिंग मतलब एक दूसरे के साथ में लिंकिंग चालू हो जाती है. एंड दिस इज वेरी क्रूशियल फॉर विजुअल सिस्टम. The reasons for this pairing back of synapses, the reasons for this pairing back of synapses is a mystery. But synaptic pruning is thought to sharpen and reinforce the correct synapses while removing the weak and unnecessary ones. Neural connections between the eyes and the brain are formed long before birth. So neural connections are formed long before birth, and before birth is fetal or fetus. Feates. Uh-oh. Uh, Establishing the wiring and circuitry that allow a child to begin visualizing the world the minute she emerges from the womb. So this is basically the neural connection before birth. During this rehearsal period, which rehearsal period? This one. Synapses points of chemical connection between nerve cells are generated in great excess only to be pruned back during later development. Now this gives you that challenge that despite reading the sentences and try to identify the topic, it's not very clear that which one is the odd one and which one is not the odd one, unless you belong to BSc or maybe biology has been your majors in 11th, 12th. All right. Otherwise, it becomes a little difficult because all the sentences are talking about the synapses of the neurons. All the sentences are talking about the importance of neurons, so it is a little difficult to identify. But yes, if you see closely, you find that neural connections between eyes and brain are formed long before the birth, establishing the wiring and circuitry. So it is talking about the wiring and circuitry that allow a child to begin visualizing the world the minute she emerges from the womb. During this rehearsal period, synapses points of chemical connection between nerve cells are generated in great excess only to be pruned back during later development. This fetal warm-up act, the soldering of neuron connections. So this is again talking about neural connections. And reason for this pairing back of synapses is mystery, but synaptic purring is thought to sharpen and reinforce the correct synapses while removing the weak and unnecessary ones. So all these four sentences are actually talking about the entire process of how these neural connections happen. But this particular sentence is talking about the structure of neuron, and you know how these axons and they release chemicals emitted to transmit a signal to the next neuron. So although it is somehow relevant, but this is talking about the structure of the neuron and not the process of synapses. So that is the reason why one becomes the odd one out. तो जैसे मैंने तुम्हें बोला कि ऑड वन आउट क्वेश्चंस में ऐसा होता है कि हर बार ऐसा नहीं है कि बहुत इजी क्वेश्चंस है, लेकिन हर बार ऐसा नहीं है कि बहुत चैलेंजिंग क्वेश्चंस है। इट्स ऑलवेज अ मिक्स ऑफ टफ एंड इजी क्वेश्चंस डिपेंडिंग ऑन कि कौन से स्लॉट में कौन सा क्वेश्चन है। देयर हैव बीन स्लॉट्स जहां पर दोनों ऑड वन आउट्स बहुत डिफिकल्ट है, जैसे ये स्लॉट 3 के दोनों क्वेश्चंस जो हैं वो थोड़े से आउट ऑफ कॉमन कॉन्टेक्स्ट वाले टॉपिक्स हैं, तो फिर थोड़ा सा डिफिकल्ट लगता है। अदरवाइज अगर कोई नैरेटिव है, कोई तरह का जनरल जर्नलिस्टिक आर्टिकल है, एऑन के कोई टॉपिक्स में से लिए हुए हैं, तो देन यू आर एबल टू डू इट क्विकली। ठीक। ओके, लेट्स डू इट टुगेदर। पार्ट ऑफ द अपील ऑफ फोरकास्टिंग, फोरकास्टिंग मतलब भविष्यवाणी करना। So part of the appeal of forecasting is not just that it seems to work, but that you don't seem to need specialized expertise to succeed at all at it. The tight connection between forecasting and building a model of the world helps explain why so much of early interest in the idea came from intelligent community. This was true even though the latter, अब ये latter मतलब क्या होता है? Former latter, latter मतलब जिसको बाद में mention किया गया है, तो हमें बहुत clearly समझ में आ रहा है कि this is a link. So this was true even though the latter had access to classified intelligence. One frequently cited study found that accurate forecasters' predictions of geopolitical events, when aggregated using standard scientific methods, were more accurate than the forecast of members of US intelligence community who answered the same questions in a confidential prediction market. तो फोर्थ वाला सेंटेंस जो है, दैट्स अ वेरी क्लियर एग्जाम्पल टू सब्सटैंशिएट, टू प्रूव दैट इंटेलिजेंस और एक्सपर्टीज नहीं चाहिए होती है टू गिव दिस फोरकास्टिंग और डू दिस फोरकास्टिंग। एक्यूरेसी के लिए एक्सपर्टीज होनी जरूरी नहीं है। The aggregated opinions of non-experts doing forecasting have proven to be a better guide to the future than the aggregated opinion of expert. तो यहाँ पर देखो, यहाँ पर दो लोग हैं, एक है नॉन एक्सपर्ट्स और ये हैं एक्सपर्ट्स। इसी चीज को यहाँ पर देखो लगा के, This was true even though the latter had access to classified intelligence. किसके पास होती है access to classified intelligence? Experts के पास में। So we find that one and after 1 probably 4, and then 3 and 5. So we see that 5, 4 and 3 are very closely related because they are talking about intelligence community. It is talking about experts, and this is saying that despite having access to classified intelligence, they fail to give good forecasting. And this is actually introducing part of the appeal of forecasting is not just that it seems to work, but that you don't seem to need specialized experts for that. This is something which is out of context. The tight connection between forecasting and building a model. So nowhere the author is talking about building a model of the world helps explain why so much of early interest in idea came from the intelligence community. So this is giving importance to the intelligence community or the experts. All the other 4 sentences are talking about why expertise is not required. Non-expert forecasters do the job better. So the answer is 2. I agree this was again not a very easy fruit to, catch. Now let's move to CAT 2023. But before we move on to next set of 6 questions of CAT, actual CAT questions, let's revise कि अभी ये जो 6 क्वेश्चन सॉल्व किए तो क्या सीखा. ठीक है, लेट्स अप्लाई देम नाउ इन द नेक्स्ट सेट ऑफ 6 क्वेश्चंस. अच्छा, सबसे पहली चीज आई अग्री दैट 6 क्वेश्चंस के सेट सॉल्व करना इज अ टीडियस टास्क, स्पेशली आफ्टर यू हैव एक्चुअली सॉल्व्ड अ सेट ऑफ क्वेश्चंस ऑन पैराजम्बल्स. ठीक है, बट प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड कि अगर हमारा स्टैमिना डेवलप नहीं होता है, अगर हम 2 घंटे 2.5 घंटे 3 घंटे बैठने की आदत नहीं है, फोकस करने की आदत नहीं है, एंड फोकसिंग ऑन सॉल्विंग क्वेश्चंस, वन वैरायटी ऑफ क्वेश्चंस, देन प्लीज डोंट एक्सपेक्ट गुड मार्क्स इन कैट. क्योंकि वहां पर तुम्हें 120 मिनट्स लगातार स्ट्रेसफुल कंडीशन में you'll have to solve questions, read a lot of passages, read data analysis and data interpretation cases, and then solve mathematical complicated questions of algebra and arithmetic and geometry. So once you have decided that you will be taking CAT and XAT exams, it is expected out of you that you should develop that kind of stamina. ऑलराइट, अगर हमारी बार बार ब्रेक लेने की आदत है, या हम 4 क्वेश्चन करने के बाद ही थक रहे हैं और बोरिंग लगने लगता है और हमें लगता है कि अरे छोड़ो कौन सॉल्व करे, देन प्रोबेबली दिल्ली दूर है तुम्हारे लिए, क्योंकि माइंड फोकस नहीं है. मेंटल फटीग के कारण तुम क्वेश्चंस को कबाड़ा कर दोगे. सो फर्स्ट लर्न टू सिट एंड फोकस एटलीस्ट फॉर 2+ hours. ओनली देन यू आर एक्सपेक्टेड टू टेक कैट एग्जाम. ठीक है, अदरवाइज अभी तुम उसके लिए रेडी नहीं हो. एंड बाय द वे 12-13 हफ्ते बचे यार, और कब होगे रेडी. ठीक है, चलो तो लेट्स रिवाइज. हमने सीखा क्या पहले तो ऑड वन आउट से, अभी जो क्वेश्चन सॉल्व किए. तो पहली चीज सीखी, रीड द डायरेक्शंस या इंस्ट्रक्शंस ऑफ questions clearly. That means, is it parajumble or odd one out? ऐसा जरूरी नहीं है 5 सेंटेंसेस हैं तो वो ऑड वन आउट ही होगा बाय डिफॉल्ट. कई बार 5 सेंटेंसेस के पैराजम्बल भी आ सकते हैं. ओके, दैट्स द रीजन मैं बार बार बोल रही हूँ दैट यू शुड बी रीडिंग द इंस्ट्रक्शंस वेरी वेरी केयरफुली. दूसरा, you don't need to sequence the sentences in odd one out. OUT, odd one out. और ट्रिपल ओ लिख दिया मैंने, odd one आउट. चलो ठीक है, ये पैराजम्बल में करना होता है. ऑड वन आउट में तुमको टाइम वेस्ट करने की बिल्कुल भी जरूरत नहीं है. इनफैक्ट तुम्हें क्या करना चाहिए, इंस्टेड ऑफ दिस व्हाट यू शुड बी एक्चुअली फोकसिंग ऑन इज ट्राई टू गेज द टॉपिक. the context or theme, जो भी तुम बोलना चाहो, that is something which is very very important. ऑलराइट, तो जो टॉपिक से इररिलेवेंट है बस वो ही आंसर होगा. Again, one thing which we learned from the previous set of 6 questions, सारे क्वेश्चंस एक लेवल के नहीं होते. कुछ क्वेश्चंस मॉडरेट होंगे, यू कैन ब्राउज थ्रू मे बी 2 times एंड यू विल बी एबल टू आइडेंटिफाई. कुछ क्वेश्चंस ऐसे होंगे जो थोड़ा सा उसका थीम, उसका जो टॉपिक है वो चैलेंजिंग होता है या थोड़ा टेक्निकल चला जाता है. दैट माइट बी चैलेंजिंग, सो डू नॉट वेस्ट लॉट ऑफ टाइम इन दैट. See, ultimately, even if you end up, giving 5 minutes to that question and then get it wrong, you are actually not just getting zero, क्योंकि नेगेटिव मार्क तो नहीं है, तो सॉल्व तो करना है, नो प्रॉब्लम. लेकिन 5 मिनट, 2 मिनट दे देते, दैट वाज गुड. लेकिन 3 मिनट जो तुम दूसरे किसी क्वेश्चन को दे सकते थे, यू हैव एक्चुअली वेस्टेड ऑन दिस. सो ये एक दो धारी तलवार है कि तुम्हारा टाइम भी खराब हो जाएगा एंड कंफ्यूजन भी बढ़ेगा. So in that case, my suggestion would be read it for 2 times. Whatever comes to your mind is the correct answer. You answer it like that. When you're practicing, like you're practicing with me and you're practicing online sessions with me, then probably एक सिटिंग में हम कम से कम 20-25 क्वेश्चंस जो हैं बार बार सॉल्व करके डिस्कस करेंगे. तब देन दैट यू शुड बी फोकसिंग ऑन कि टफेस्ट क्वेश्चंस को भी हम सॉल्व करें. यू शुड नॉट बी लीविंग इट, क्योंकि रीजनिंग जितनी ज्यादा डिस्कशन से डेवलप होती है उतनी किसी और चीज से नहीं. बट डोंट डू दैट इन दी मॉक्स. मॉक का अप्रोच और क्लासरूम डिस्कशन का अप्रोच अलग अलग होता है. ठीक है बेटा, चलो लेट्स मूव ऑन टू कैट 2023 क्वेश्चंस. आई होप इस बार थोड़ा सा इजी पड़े तुमको, या तुम थोड़ा सा ज्यादा जल्दी क्वेश्चंस को सॉल्व कर पाओ. All right, are you able to identify the topic? टॉपिक को आइडेंटिफाई करना है सबसे पहले. Okay, let's do it together. Boa Senior, who lived through the 2004 tsunami, the Japanese occupation and diseases brought by British settlers, was the last native of the island chain who was fluent in Bo. Fluent in Bo means this is a language. The indigenous population has been steadily collapsing since the island chain was colonized by British settlers in 1858 and used for most of the following 100 years as a colonial penal colony. So this is talking about decline in the population, and decline has been catalyzed by British settlers since 1858. Taking its name from now extinct tribe, Bo is one of the 10 great Andamanese languages which are thought to date back to pre-Neolithic human settlement of Southeast Asia. So taking its name from now extinct tribes. So this is giving us context of this language Bo because it is one of the 10 great Andamese languages. The last speaker of an ancient tribal language has died in Andaman Island, breaking a 65,000 year link to one of the world's oldest cultures. So the last speaker has died. And this last speaker is this Boa Senior. Though the language has been closely studied by researchers of linguistic history, Boa Senior spent the last few years of her life unable to converse with anyone in her mother tongue. So we can very clearly see that sentence number 1, sentence number 4, sentence number 5 are all talking about this last person who was speaking the language Bo. And sentence 3 is talking about the context of name of Bo, where it came from, and what is the relevance because it is one of the 10 great Andamese language. But with C2, this is talking about indigenous population collapsing because of British settlers. So this is not actually talking about the language used. It is only talking about the indigenous population and decline in population. All right. So this is something which is odd one out. This is out of context. देखो बाकी चारों sentences का context क्या आ रहा है? They are all talking about this last person who was able to speak this language because this is also talking about fluency in Bo and that has been introduced in last speaker of ancient tribal language Bo. So only 2 is not at all talking about the language. It is talking about the indigenous population collapsing. All right, next question. Any clue? Okay, try this one. This is also an easy question. Although hard skills have traditionally ruled the roost, that means they have been very, very important, significant. Some companies are moving away from choosing prospective hires based on technical abilities alone. Companies are shaking off the old definition of an ideal candidate and ditching the idea of looking for the singularly perfect candidate altogether. Now, some job descriptions are frequently asking for candidates to demonstrate soft skills. So, this is talking about hard skills, soft skills, such as leadership or teamwork. That's not to say that practical know how is no longer required. Some jobs still call for highly specific expertise. The move towards prioritizing soft skills is a natural response to 3 years of pandemic, says a senior recruiter at Fenler FSB. All right, so when we look at it and identify the topic, we find that the topic is how soft skills are now overpowering and they are more important and they are more relevant than the hard skills. Only technical abilities will not fetch you a job, but still we have some jobs wherein highly specific expertise is required. But largely it is giving importance to soft skills. You can see very clearly that sentence number 1, 3, 4, 5, they are talking about how hard skills are getting, uh, you know, defeated by soft skills. That companies are now asking for candidates who have good soft skills. But when we look at the sentence 2, it is talking about companies are shaking off the old definition of an ideal candidate and ditching idea of looking for singularly perfect candidate. Nowhere in the sentences it is talking about perfect or ideal candidate. It is only comparing importance of soft skills as compared to hard skills. And it is saying that soft skills are more important and more relevant now after pandemic. So very clearly, second one, which is talking about ideal candidate. This is something which is out of context. This is out of context. Okay, let's try out this one. So here you have to identify the topic. Although sentences are all related to one topic, but then the context changes. And let's see how. The banning of northern lights, see N and L are capital. So that means this is name of a book. Northern lights. The banning of northern lights could be considered a precursor to censoring books for moral, worldview, or religious reasons. So moral is put in inverted quotes. That means this is a taunt that मोरालिटी के नाम पे, रिलीजन के नाम पे किताबों को सेंसर करने की शुरुआत इस बुक से हुई है. Attempts to ban books are attempts to silence authors who have summoned immense courage in telling their stories. So this is also talking about banning books. Now the banning and challenging of books in the US has escalated to an unprecedented level. Unprecedented किसको बोलते हैं? Never before. Something which has never happened before. अभूतपूर्व जिसको हिंदी में बोलते हैं. The widely acclaimed fantasy novel Northern Lights was banned in some parts of the US and was the second most challenged book in the US. So 4 and 1 clearly show a link. The American Library Association documented an unparalleled number of reported book challenges in 2022, about 2,500 unique titles. So this is talking about banning and challenging books in the US. And what has been the unprecedented number? This is 2,500 unique titles which were banned in just 1 year. All right, so all the sentences are talking about ban on books. All the sentences are talking about ban on books in US, except I suppose 2. This is talking about attempt to silence author. I think this is more philosophical, poetical in context, and rest of the sentences are more, data based or reality based. So this is basically out of context. This is T, huh? All right. Let's gear up quickly. We are running short of time now. We have a lot of questions to discuss. All right. So self-care particularly links to loneliness, self-care links to loneliness, behavioral problems, and negative academic outcomes. Latchkey children refers to children who routinely return home from school to empty homes and take care of themselves for extended period of time. Although self-care generally points to negative outcomes, it is important to consider that bulk of research has yet to track long-term consequences. In research and practice, the phrase children in self-care has come to replace latchkey in an effort to more accurately reflect the nature of their circumstances. So clearly 4 and 2 make a link. Both are talking about these latchkey children who come to homes which are empty, खाली घरों में आते हैं, and they take care of themselves for an extended period of time. Probably both parents are out for work. Although parents might believe that self-care would be beneficial for development, recent research has found quite the opposite. So we can very clearly see that ये वाला sentence बोल रहा है recent research has found quite the opposite. मतलब self care is not beneficial. It is not beneficial. It has found. जबकि ये वाला सेंटेंस क्या बोल रहा है कि सेल्फ केयर जनरली तो नेगेटिव हम लोग मानते हैं, लेकिन अभी रिसर्च ऐसा कुछ बता नहीं पाई है लॉन्ग टर्म कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज में. तो वेरी क्लियरली या तो 3 और या तो 5 में से कोई आउट होना चाहिए, क्योंकि सेल्फ केयर की प्रॉब्लम्स क्या क्या हैं वो 1 में है. तो अगर हम ये देखें तो दिस इज टॉकिंग अबाउट latchkey children's. This is also talking about latchkey children, sorry, who are going to home in the empty homes. And although parents ये consider करते हैं कि ये बहुत beneficial होता है, but self care particularly links to loneliness, behavioral problem. तो problems हो गई, 1 problem, 2 problem and 3rd problem. तो इसका मतलब हम यहाँ पे पेरेंट्स को झूठा साबित कर रहे हैं. जबकि अगर हम थर्ड वाला सेंटेंस देखें, थर्ड वाला सेंटेंस दिस इज टॉकिंग अबाउट कि उसको नेगेटिव माना जाता है लेकिन अभी तक उसको प्रूव नहीं कर पाए. तो दिस इज समथिंग विच इज आउट ऑफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट. ठीक है ना. देखो कॉन्टेक्स्ट के हिसाब से देखो तो आंसर बहुत क्विकली आ जाता है हाथ में. You will hardly take time in solving questions if you are able to identify the topic and identify the context in which the sentences are talking. तो एक सेंटेंस होगा जो उस टॉपिक से रिलेट तो कर रहा होगा लेकिन कॉन्टेक्स्ट से नहीं. तो और बहुत सारे केसेस में तो टॉपिक से रिलेटेड नहीं है तो वो बहुत इजीली आइडेंटिफाई हो जाता है. तो अगर टॉपिक से फिर भी रेलेवेंट है तो भी, जैसे सेल्फ केयर के ऊपर बात हो रही है तो सेल्फ केयर पे सारे सेंटेंसेस हैं, लेकिन एक सेंटेंस जो है वो नेगेटिव को डिनाई करके पॉजिटिव की बात कर रहा है, बाकी चारों सेंटेंसेस नेगेटिव बात कर रहे हैं. सो दैट्स द वे वी आइडेंटिफाई दी कॉन्टेक्स्ट एंड ऑड वन आउट. ऑलवेज कीप इन माइंड कि कैट तुम्हें कभी भी इतने लड्डू क्वेश्चन नहीं दे रहा दैट just by skimming through the sentences you'll be able to identify, and don't try to match the verbal hints only. That doesn't work in cat के लिए तुम्हें contextually उसको फॉलो करना पड़ेगा. ठीक है, सीक्वेंस की जरूरत नहीं है लेकिन कॉन्टेक्स्ट जरूर आइडेंटिफाई करना है. Now this is one of the questions जहां पर कि context ढूंढना इतना easy नहीं होता because the topic is not very commonplace. यहाँ पर verbal hints could be of great help. Okay. So having an appreciation for workings of another person's mind is considered a prerequisite for natural language acquisition, strategic social interaction, reflective thought, and moral judgment. So very clearly, I get an idea about what is the topic about. It is working of another person's mind. It is a theory of mind, though some scholars prefer to call it mentalizing or mind reading, which is important for the development of one's cognitive ability. So, this is talking about one's cognitive abilities. All right. We also have to identify what is this it. Although we must speculate about its evolutionary origin, we do have indications that the capacity evolved sometime in last few million years. This capacity develops from early beginnings in the first year of life to the adult's fast and often effortless understanding of others' thoughts, feelings, and intentions. One of the most fascinating human capacities, one of the most fascinating human capacities is the ability to perceive and interpret other people's behavior in terms of their mental states. So, very clearly, sentence 1, 5, 4, and 3 are talking about capacity of human intelligence or brains to understand another person's behavior, feeling, and mind. Fifth one could be the starting one because it is introducing it. One of the most fascinating human capacities is the ability to perceive and interpret other people's behavior in terms of their mental states. So even if we do not sequence them, we very clearly understand that in the sentence 2, we are actually not talking about reading other person's mind, but it is theory of mind in general, talking about mentalizing or mind reading, which is basically important for development of one's own cognitive abilities, isn't it? So it's not talking about understanding others' behavior or feelings. This is one's own cognitive abilities. Rest of the sentences are talking about another person's mind, uh, others' thoughts and feelings and intentions, interpret and perceive other people's behavior. So very clearly, all the sentences are talking about reading other person's mind. This is not talking about it, and hence this one is the odd one. All right. Next question. This perhaps is the last question of today's session. We have done good number of questions from CAT 2024, 2023. I suppose this is good enough practice for one stretch. Solve this last question and we'll end up the session. This is a tricky question. So read slowly and then only give answer. In English, there is no systematic rule for naming of numbers. After 10, we have 11, 12, and then the teens, 13, 14, 15, and so on. Even more confusingly, some English words invert the numbers they refer to. The word 14 puts the 4 first, even though it appears last. So what does this mean? Invert. हम 14 कैसे लिखते हैं? ऐसे. लेकिन जब बोलते हैं तो 4 पहले बोलते हैं और 3 बाद में लगाते हैं. That's what the author is saying. It can take children a while to learn all these words and understand that 14 is different from 40. So ये sound का difference है. यहाँ 14 है, यहाँ 40 है. For multiples of 10, English speakers switch to a different pattern. 20, 30, 40, and so on. So basically, this is talking about tens, multiples of tens, and this is talking about after 10, what we call. Okay? So these are interrelated because these are talking about the sounds. 13, 14, 15. This is 20, 30, 40. If you didn't know the word for 11, you would be unable to just guess it. You might come up with something like 1 teen. Again, this is relevant with the first sentence because this is talking about no systematic rule for naming the numbers. In fact, second one is also relevant with the fifth one. Even more confusingly, some English words invert the number like 14. So if you didn't know the word 11, you would probably call it 1 teen. So rest of the sentences are talking about having no systematic system or rule for naming the numbers. The third one is talking about the children and the challenge to the children for learning these words and understand the difference between the sound. So although रीड करने पे लगता है कि हाँ चिल्ड्रन को प्रॉब्लम होगी, ये इससे रिलेट कर रहा है क्योंकि वो 14 और 40 को रिलेट कर रहा है. But when we look at the context of the sentences, all the sentences are talking about the problem that there is no systematic rule. You call 11 1 teen और 10 के मल्टीपल्स जो हैं वो 30, 40, 50 हो जाते हैं, जबकि टीन्स में भी प्रॉब्लम है कि जो लिखा गया है उसका ऑपोजिट बोला जा रहा है. So technical discussion है बाकी sentences में. यहाँ पर children might take time to understand that. So this is the odd one out. Odd one. So that's all from today's session. All right. So read the instructions before you solve any question like Parajumble or odd one out. Why you need to read the instructions? Because you might end up wasting hell of your time solving the question correctly also, but writing the answer of odd one out in the sequence of Parajumble, or maybe solving a Parajumble in this odd one out. So don't do that. Don't panic. Read the instructions carefully and then only solve. Don't waste time in sequencing in odd one out questions. In Parajumble only you need to sequence the sentences. Don't do that in odd one out questions, otherwise you will end up wasting a lot of time. All right. In none of the questions, by the way, I did that. Isn't it? So when we were discussing, I never actually got into कि opening sentence क्या होगा, closing sentence क्या होगा. I was only focusing on the contextual flow of the topic and verbal clues. That's enough for identifying the odd sentence out. Look for contextual links, not just verbal hints. ये CMAT के लेवल पे काम करता है, लेकिन CAT के लेवल पे contextual link बहुत जरूरी है. When caught between options in the sense of कि odd one out तुमको लग रहा है 3 या 5 में से कोई है, जैसे अभी अपने डिस्कशन में हो रहा था कि 4 हो सकता है, 2 हो सकता है, 3 हो सकता है, 5 हो सकता है. When you're caught between these two options, don't play that, tic tac toe कि अक्कड़ बक्कड़ बम्बे वो कर रहे हैं, और नहीं, कुछ नहीं. बस वॉट एवर यू फील लाइक उसको एक बार रीड कर लो, उस कंफर्मेशन तुमको जो है बस उसको माफ करो, आगे बढ़ जाओ. अदरवाइज if you don't move on, you will end up killing your time. Odd one out questions are best killers of your time. हमें सबसे इजी लगते हैं इसलिए हम टूट पड़ते हैं. पीटा क्वेश्चंस हैं, कोई नेगेटिव मार्किंग नहीं है, लेकिन हम पूरा टाइम उसमें बर्बाद कर देते हैं, तो डोंट डू दैट. ठीक है, स्पेंड टाइम बट देन डोंट स्पेंड टू मच टाइम. मार्क तो करना ही है, किसी मॉक में किसी एग्जाम में ऑड वन आउट क्वेश्चंस को नहीं छोड़ना है. स्पेशली कैट में तो बिल्कुल नहीं, बिकॉज थीटा क्वेश्चंस है, नेगेटिव मार्किंग नहीं है. तो अगर गलत भी गया तो कोई प्रॉब्लम, बट डोंट वेस्ट टाइम इज व्हाट द लर्निंग इज. ठीक है. सो अंटिल वी मीट नेक्स्ट टाइम, आई होप यूल टेक केयर ऑफ योर सेल्फ. वेदर कंडीशंस काफी ज्यादा फ्लक्चुएटिंग है, स्पेशली अभी के सीजन में. टेक गुड केयर ऑफ योर सेल्फ. बीमार पड़ने की बिल्कुल गुंजाइश हमारे पास है नहीं. All right, so it's no time left now. I expect you to be very sincerely following YouTube live sessions of Supergrads CAT in Quants, DLR, as well as VARC. And I'm very sure that these all sessions are going to add value and help you to score well in your mocks. So until we meet next time, bye.